Okay, so this week was our first kind of dip our toes in the water. I know it probably didn't feel like that, but dipping our toes in the water of dealing with cultural studies theory. Um, and we read a very highly influential piece in the field of cultural studies and for media theory more broadly construed, with Adorno and Horkheimer's write up on the culture industry. Okay, so first I want to ask, how did y'all feel about that reading, the amount of it, the style of it? Because part of what we need to do is like figure out how to break down and interpret and understand theoretical writing, since that's mostly what we're reading in this class. So does anybody have thoughts about any of that stuff?
Hey, so this Anthony Sisson.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
So when I read it came off confusing.
Mm-hmm.
I have to after I read well, I didn't read the whole thing. I managed to get a big chunk of it.
Yeah.
But it I have to read it like some paragraphs a couple of times to get an understanding from it.
Mm-hmm.
But from what I read, and from the research I did a little bit more research on the reading to get a better understanding outside
Good.
of it. So from my understanding, it was the author was talking about how culture, like I guess pop culture was the reason it holds its power as it is because of its sameness, like the repeating, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so yes, a huge component of what's going on with the Frankfurt School in general is that they're critiquing culture at a moment where kind of everything is blossoming into um, kind of a repetitive mechanical structure, right? So that systems of labor are becoming mechanical and repetitive. Um, the types of culture that we're being exposed to are becoming repetitive. So if we think about the types of movies that Hollywood is putting out, okay, um, the types of TV shows that they're putting out, do they conform to formula? Are they interested in producing different or independent experiences? The answer increasingly is no, right? As corporate consolidation starts to happen first under the studio system, and then it's kind of broken up for a little bit, and then it kind of picks back up again in the 1980s where everything starts to become more consolidated. But all of this is also bound up in just like the systems of capital and production, right?
Yeah,
So,
because when reading it, it was talking about the sameness in like Hollywood and like certain areas in the field, like, and they made a comparison to like how the reason Germany failed because it projected the same thing, if that makes sense.
yes, I think like it's a little more complicated than that, but they say that like you can read that into it, right? Like you can
Yeah.
understand what's going on there. So that's good. Anybody else have thoughts on it? I'm glad that people have gone and done their own kind of looking around to kind of help contextualize this. It's also what I'm trying to do in my little videos that I'm uploading, is to kind of just provide a brief overview of the main thing and where they're coming from. So hopefully that was also a little helpful to some of y'all. Um, it is not going to be the case that you won't wrap your head around everything um, every single time, but it's okay to feel that way, right? They're writing in a style that is purposefully argumentative and rhetorical. Okay, so that they are Adorno and Horkheimer, kind of each paragraph just re-emphasizes their main point. Okay, and that's how they're writing. It's not like a structured essay where you have introduction, evidence, 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 and then conclusions, right? Or possible futures, or whatever the conclusion needs to be. It's here's a paragraph that is about a thing. Here's a paragraph that's about that same thing, but maybe there's different evidence cited. And then it kind of builds from there, right? Just so that they keep making their point over and over and over again.
And that's how I felt, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
through reading it. And it wasn't until certain parts of the pages that I didn't really, that I understood. So, like, I know on page 4, when it said real life is becoming indistinguishable from the movies,
Yes.
I kind of understood better what it was elaborating at the beginning, because I was just thrown off. But
Yes. And that is exactly how you should have felt, I think, reading this, right? They are making the point over and over again, mostly because they know that different people will reach different conclusions about, or like have a different understanding of it based on what their examples they're talking about are, right? So if they're really talking about labor, and people are approaching it through a lens of labor in that paragraph, then that will be the one that drives their point home to them. If you're really familiar with how movies are made and how we interpret film, that will be something that kind of helps you understand what they're saying, right? So they're making these different points, hoping that at some point, one or two or multiple points actually hit home with whoever's reading it. So it's okay to not get exactly what they're talking about the whole time. I also know that probably part of the weirdness of reading it is that you probably have not, in spite of being in college and in spite of the perception that college is all professors browbeating you into believing Karl Marx, you've probably not actually had that big of an exposure to what the concepts, the general philosophical concepts of Marxism actually are. Is that true? Has anybody dealt with Marx in any real capacity? In any classes?
To a certain extent, in critical thinking,
Mm-hmm.
philosophy class, we
Yeah,
dived we dived a little bit into it, but we didn't go into like huge depth on it. That's why it was kind of easy for me to understand what he was talking about.
mm-hmm.
But then, like thinking about it, I kind of think the author made it to the point where you're really not supposed to read the whole thing, but skim through it, if that makes sense.
Yes, and it's also one of those things where like you can get the point pretty easily and or spend a lot of time dwelling on the very fine points of it. And that's what reading a lot of theory is. So a few of you have sitting here like a few of you have dealt with it a bit, some in overviews like film theory and sociology 101. Yes, that's been my experience, Roberto, is that people get like, this is what alienation is, and then everybody kind of moves on, right? So for those of you who haven't been exposed, I'm going to give that brief overview that Roberto's kind of talking about, but then we can relate that back to the essay, which is making a very in-depth analysis of how alienation is shaping social structures through culture. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen so y'all can see this very brief video, because I'm not going to bore you with me talking about it. Okay, hopefully everybody can see this.
Consider, my dear viewers, a world without money, without class divisions, where everyone gives according to their abilities and takes according to their needs. Sounds pretty sweet, no? To German poet and philosopher Karl Marx, such a communist utopia was not only possible, it was inevitable, or what he called the march of history. Though deeply influenced by Hegel, who proposed that history develops through the abstract concept of world spirit, Marx believed that it is not conflict of ideas that propels history, but rather conflict arising out of our relation to material goods that will bring history to its end, specifically our working conditions. Marx calls this historical process dialectical materialism. Initially, humanity was concerned only with the most basic acts of our species, producing for personal survival. But as the population multiplied, economic systems were established to address the needs of all. And with economics, an individual's relationship to the products they create changes, for one is no longer producing for their own immediate needs. They are producing for others. Fast forward to the Industrial Revolution, where mankind created mechanisms to fulfill the needs of many with unprecedented efficiency. These mechanisms, or capital, are owned by individuals, leading to enormous concentrations of wealth. And for the tired worker who must operate these machines, there is no getting ahead. For in order for the capitalist to maximize profit, he must pay the workers little more than is necessary to survive. To Marx, this economic system of capitalism thrives on exploitation and creates widespread unhappiness through what he calls alienation. For starters, I am alienated from the fruits of my labor. If I create a turnip, it'll be sold to another. And in exchange, I'll be paid a wage and become as much of a commodity as the thing I produce. Thus, I am removed from my work. I do not see myself in my labor. Capitalism also alienates us from each other. For the worker to produce efficiently, the capitalist tells them they are in constant competition for their job, thereby turning our fellow man into an adversary rather than an ally. Furthermore, capitalism alienates us from our very nature. Creating is a great source of satisfaction for our species. But because we are forced to make things that we have no personal investment in, our lives become a burden. As time goes on and industrial powers become increasingly concentrated among a select elite, the gap between the working class and the capitalist will only become wider. To Marx, this gap will eventually become so pronounced that the workers, in their profound frustration, will rise up and overthrow the oppression of the few and usher in a new society. A society in which there is no private property, there are no class divisions, where people's labor is held for the common good, and where all work according to their ability. And that, my friends, is communism. Even today, Marxism is one of the most powerful ideologies in the world. And to some, the ushering in of the Marxist utopia still lies in the not-too-distant future.
Okay, so does that video help make sense of just the general concepts Marx is trying to get at?
Yes.
Okay. So the idea that Adorno and Horkheimer really pick up with here is, okay, if mechanized labor is alienating us from the fruits of our labor, and we're no longer attached directly to that, right? And we've become a commodity. How does that system further commoditize us? So when they start looking at things like going to the movies and the system of production for film, producing the same types of things that we then go and see in our leisure time, spending the money that we've created or been paid as a commodity for the owner class, right? We become further built into a system of alienation. Okay? Do y'all understand that basically? That's what they're doing here, okay? Then to go beyond that and say that if this is the way that capitalism works and industrialized capitalism works, and then industrialized culture works to build us back into the system of industrialized capitalism, right? Then what does that mean for where culture and society is actually headed? Okay. And because of their specific historical position, they come to very bleak conclusions, right? So where do they see society heading, and what happens to culture? This was part of our discussion questions that we did this week. Anybody want to take that?
Can you rephrase the question real quick?
Yeah, so what do Adorno and Horkheimer say happens to society and culture if it's part of that system of industrialized labor, industrialized culture, and industrialized consumption of that culture?
I think it was saying at some point in the article I read online that it was like fascism.
Yeah.
I couldn't really I really couldn't understand that part of the question you asked, so that was the only guess I really took at it.
So why would they say it leads to fascism?
Can I take a stab?
Yeah, please do.
So what I was taking is that if the industrial complex also controls the media we consume and use to kind of build our worldview, they therefore have an almost monopoly-like hold on how we perceive the world and what we internalize based on our media. So
Right.
if the people in charge are making the movies that tell the stories they want us to internalize, they can further continue the cycle of this is all you can do, this is all you have, instead of allowing you to believe that there is more, that there is another option.
Right. And because in the Marxist worldview of how history, long view of history has developed, right? The system of capital can only ever reproduce itself. And so by industrializing culture and by making kind of a blanket sameness, it reproduces the exact capital system, except now that it's doing it outside of production labor relations, and it's bringing that into the entirety of culture. Do y'all see that?
Can I link everyone to a video I found yesterday that looks at Hayao Miyazaki? It actually touched on this exact same topic.
Yeah, do you want to throw it in the chat, and then I'll make sure it gets thrown on iCollege?
If y'all don't mind. Because
Yeah,
like, it
please do.
explained it in a way that was a bit more succinct than the overview video was. And it focuses on my personal favorite movie, Howl's Moving Castle.
Okay, yeah, sure, shoot that
A lot
over.
about like propaganda and how the basic governmental control over US media influences the culture that watches it.
Right. And that's really what the New Yorker article is trying to get at too, right? About how these very early media theorists and how they were thinking about media kind of did also, sort of predict American politics in the late 20th century, kind of the end game of a very high percentage of confluence between structures of capital and the government, right? Which is exactly why they thought it would happen, is because they had seen all of this already play out in Germany, right? Nazi Germany was basically a capitalist system that was state run, okay? It is not a socialist system. It is not a communist system. It was the government and private firms in collusion with one another, working together, okay? I know that gets a little weird, especially in our discourse today where everybody talks about like left-wing Nazis or whatever, but that is not a thing, okay? Political ideologies are not malleable in that same way that like everything's the same once you hit a certain part of the extremism spectrum. It was a very specific type of fascism and totalitarianism, right? So rather than thinking just on a left-right binary, we might also think about a top-down authoritarian, completely communal run kind of spectrum as well. Okay. So that brings us, I think, to the article that we read from the New Yorker. What did you think of that argument? And, you know, I'm not here to put thoughts in anybody's head. I don't really care what your political views are. I'll be very honest with mine if y'all want to know them, but I don't know that that's super important. But this is somebody who's using these ideas, and they're doing cultural analysis and media analysis using them. So what y'all think of that New Yorker article?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I thought it was a little naive at some points that it was considering like Trump the beginning of a fascist American state, as opposed to 30 years of massive deregulation and then a enormous xenophobic war that was completely unfounded. So
Okay. Yeah.
the point of that on Trump is a little like pearl clutching liberalism to me. What else did I even say? I'm just looking through it real quick.
Sure. I will say that I think in general, the point that, you know, that the author would probably have made, or was even trying to make in my, like, you know, that was written just after Trump won the election in 2016. So
Yeah.
I've read it a lot at this point, teaching it. What I get out of it more so is that, like, it's not necessarily that Trump is the beginning. It's that it's kind of the point they were warning us about getting to, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Right. So, you know, I think having read it a lot, that's more what it is. It's a little unclear. I will grant you that. It's not the most succinctly written
It's like more
analysis.
Trump is a byproduct of what's been building for a while.
Yes. Or kind of like the end result of how, like, if you keep going down the same path, where do you end up? Right?
Well, yeah, sure. I'll agree with that.
And I think that that's a little bit more what they were getting to. But all of those are good points. Why pick up, like, Trump outside of the left-right spectrum, the actual politics of it? What is it about Trump that is tied directly to Adorno and Horkheimer and how they're talking about this system of culture as an industry?
Maybe the fact that like he's so much more sensationalized, and that there's an immediate. I'm sorry, my cat. There's an
That's
immediate reason to report on him in the media because.
I mean, he's an entertainer. He's not even like, he doesn't have the political background that
Right, he's not a traditional politician.
having. So it's like, how else could you not?
Right.
Exactly. He's like a direct product of the media that he attacks.
Right.
And so how the media plays a part into it, because it's just all fed.
Okay, so right. So what they're saying, and I'm just going to jump in here just to kind of consolidate that argument a little bit, if that's okay with y'all. The point being made is that for 30 years before he was even running for president, Donald Trump had mainly been a figure in pop culture. He had been a reality show star. Before that, he was most famous for, like, being in Pizza Hut commercials as the rich guy who ate the stuffed crust pizza backwards. He was famous for his, like, cameos in movies like Home Alone 2. And he was just kind of like this media figure, more than even like a real business person that people took super seriously, right? He was a media figure. And that's not an aspersion. I'm not trying to get into, like, is the guy's wealth whatever, or is he a good businessman? All that's out there. You can look at stuff and come to your own conclusions about whatever. But that is the main crux of his public persona for a long time, was this media figure persona, right? And then doing like a decade of hosting The Apprentice and then Celebrity Apprentice. So he's this reality show host who has that persona and is given all this attention in the media before even like venturing into politics. And why are they giving him the attention then? What is it about Donald Trump that speaks to Americans? Why is the media interested in him, right? Well, ideologically, if we're talking about kind of the big theme of this week and next week, as far as capital I ideology goes, he is, before all of this, right, an image of wealth, an image of somebody who lives the life that the American dream might afford people. He is representative of a type, a very specific type of aspirational thought, right? People are drawn to that lifestyle and energy, okay? That is exactly what Adorno and Horkheimer were talking about when they say that that structure of capital is going to replicate itself in that culture, and then it's going to be picked up and fed back into it so that everything becomes the same. Politics, labor, our individual lives are indistinguishable from one another along this spectrum because it flattens it out. Do y'all see where that's coming from? Okay. Hold on one second. I'm going to pull a couple things up real quick just to illustrate with like outside of just Trump, like, because I don't want us to just dwell on politics, although that is kind of the big thing for them. I'm going to share my screen with y'all. Okay, so if you see this, these are the companies that own most of the food brands that you see in the supermarket, right? Pretty much anything that you would go and pick up that has a brand name on it is owned by these companies. Most of them are international conglomerates, right? This is also the same exact thing if we look at what media ownership, and this is just in the US, looks like. You have hubs, right? AT&T, Warner Media, Verizon, Comcast, which has NBC Universal. Netflix is big. Hulu is not as big, but it's also owned by these other companies. Disney 21st Century, which owns all this stuff. And then you have your smaller studios. Then you have your telecoms companies that don't necessarily own huge studios. Some of them are, you know, vested in different things down here, but they're not really individual, okay? So just in the structures here, you can see that they're, you know, writing about it like has predicted exactly what's happened, right? It's a top-down consolidation as well as a horizontal consolidation of experience, something that we might think of as an illusion of choice, right? What if you go to the movie theater in any typical year when there's not a global pandemic going on, right? And let's say it's the middle of July. What types of movies do you get the choice to see?
I work at art theater in Atlanta called Terra, and currently we are only playing The New Mutants. Actually, I think we were started playing Tenet this week. So it kind of reached its critical boiling point for us too, that little specialized theaters. And this is because of like special circumstance, but now we're only playing Disney movies.
Right. And it's also like just indicative of the power that those companies have to get those films into those theaters, even in a moment where like theatrical attendance is really low. They're trying to drum up as much interest as possible. Part of it is also that like, you know, your companies that own all of those theaters like Regal, AMC, Cinemark, they're trying to recover profits as well. So even their art cinemas will be playing these large movies. The reason they're playing the large movies is not just because of the pandemic, right? Let's remove the art cinema part of it out of it, right? So like not typically the Terra, not necessarily always at the Midtown Art Cinema over there on Monroe. But if you go to your typical Regal, your typical AMC, your choices are basically, you know, superhero flick of the week, something where somebody's fighting a giant monster, usually The Rock these days, right? Or something with car chases, and then there might be some counter programming, but that's your typical summer, right? It's action, spectacle, big money blockbuster, right? What are the actual differences between those movies? What's the difference between Fast and Furious 8 and Thor Ragnarok? Anybody?
The storyline and their perspective universes.
Yes. Otherwise, the structure extremely similar, right? There's going to be a big action set piece up front. The characters are largely all capable of doing things that are well outside the physical realms of possibility, right? It all looks similar, right? So it's shot with very high gloss cinematography. It usually is stylized somewhat differently, so there are small differentiations. But what we're talking about is the difference between watching a Marvel movie and watching an entry in the Fast and Furious franchise is literally the difference of going to the store and here's Fruity Pebbles and here's the off-brand Fruity Pebbles. Y'all see that? Or, you know, if you go to the, let's stay on the cereal aisle, go to the cereal aisle. How many different types of Special K are there?
A couple.
There's a whole lot. It's like a whole wall of that aisle, right? It's like everything is just, these are cornflakes. And then, you know, this one has strawberries and this one has blueberries and this one has like yogurt covered chunks of whatever. But at the end of the day, what you're getting is a box of cornflakes, right? It's an illusion that you have all this choice, but really it's the same. And you can look at all the media. You can look at every single aspect. This is what Adorno and Horkheimer are talking about. You have lots of choices, but the actual differences between that choice is minor, right? Ghost hunting shows. Okay, do you want to watch the ghost hunting show with the bald guy? Or do you want to watch the ghost hunting show with the Vegas dude bros wearing the Ed Hardy shirts? That's your choice, right? Do y'all see where this is coming from here?
Yeah. I think the point you say is I think that was the biggest thing I got from the article this week. Humanization. What's the word?
Homogenization.
Yeah, like the product we get is all the same. Like where like more of, you know, they kind of like trick us into the like the system they built for us. We're like receiving what's out there. We're not, you know, really as customer, you know, we're paying these companies. Yeah, what they say was like we're working for them, not knowing that we are still like we're off work, like we're still like paying our that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, right. Like they get the thing we produce when we are at work, right? They sell that thing, and then when we're off, we are still going and taking time out of our own lives to create further value, right? Like, why would any normal person care at all whether or not Justice League makes more money than Avengers? Why would anyone care? What investment do you have? And yet, right, if you hop on Twitter, oh my God, how that blows up, right? Like Marvel and DC, like it's some big conspiracy against one another, or this movie's better. Like we can all have our preferences, but why do you care about which corporation makes $1 billion every weekend? Right? So even our entertainment, in a very literal sense, becomes invested in us caring how much money corporations make. It goes through every other aspect too. Why do you get online and let's say somebody says something terrible about Elon Musk, or like, says that Teslas are crap cars, or whatever they want to say, right? Why get online and defend Elon Musk? What is that about? Right? Because you're invested in that, which means you're just invested in the system of capital, right? Elon Musk doesn't care. Elon Musk has so much money. If he didn't have some like weird need to just tweet all the time, no one would ever care what he's doing at all, ever. He could just disappear, live a happy life. No one would ever have to talk about him, or he wouldn't have to think about anybody else, right? But it's all that system of keeping us built into it and keeping us, and this is the important part for Adorno and Horkheimer, keeping us unaware of it, right? So that we become personally invested and it becomes personal to us, as opposed to being able to look at what's happening objectively. And to go back to the New Yorker piece, right? People becoming attached to a figure like Donald Trump, as opposed to being able to step back and say, okay, here's the reality on the ground. This is kind of the direction that this set of policies will end up at and or not end up at, and thinking about where I want to go. It becomes either personality based, or you become just really personally attached to the idea that you're going to win, even though it's like, and this isn't just Donald Trump, no politician really cares about you, like on a one-on-one level. Some care generally about society, right? It's very rare that somebody cares one-on-one about you. So this is not just me saying this about Trump. It's just like, they don't care, right? So why are you so personally invested in that person as opposed to the idea? And that's what Adorno and Horkheimer say is dangerous. And that's what the New Yorker piece was saying is kind of like dangerous about Trump being in the position to finally push us over the edge as of 2017. And I don't think, if you look at what the argument was in that article and where we are now, that things have changed all that much. We're still kind of right there on that precipice. Any thoughts about any of that stuff?
So is the argument that it's like a
Mhm.
parasocial relationship between the exploited and their exploiters, or that it's like, just kind of ascribing teams to everything?
I think it's a combination of all of that. But remember, it's purely tied up in a critique of how capitalist structure works, right? And in the Marxist view of history, and this is especially true of the Frankfurt School philosophers, that particular strand of capitalism where the government and capital are so closely aligned, right, can only ever end up in the exact situation that happened in Nazi Germany, which they fled. You see that part of it?
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily like all capitalist structure is bad, but when you have all of these elements and they all start to converge, there is only one end of the line where that train gets off. And so it's an alarmist interpretation of popular culture.
Okay.
Okay. And maybe rightfully so. Anybody have questions about any of that stuff? Or about the essays specifically or generally? Go ahead with it if you do, or type it into the box. All right, give me 1 second. I'm going to pause the recording, okay? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I was kind of confused on how the layout of the discussion post should be. Like, does it really matter how we answer, like bullet points or paragraph?
No. I want them to be productive for you in that, sometimes I'll give you very direct prompts. In a few weeks, you'll get a couple that are kind of a little more loose. but I want them to be productive for y'all to either just reflect on the reading and whatever we've been talking about for the week or the week prior, as it were, however you need to do it. For me, it's just me checking in and making sure nobody is way off base with the readings, since we're not meeting twice a week and we're not doing in-person lecture Q&A. So it's not really like I'm going to grade them super hard or anything. It's more just so I can monitor where we all are. But I think as long as you're using them to answer whatever questions I'm asking, it'll function pretty well for you to be prepped for the kind of non-test tests that we have, as well as just, you know, having a bunch of stuff in your toolkit. So when it comes to thinking about what your final projects might be, you can look at all your notes and say, oh, I can pull this idea from here. I need to go back and read this part of it again, because they're talking directly about something that I want to say, and that sort of thing. Okay. Any other questions about stuff? Do we feel okay with our discussion of ideology this week?
I feel okay. I hate for you to have to reiterate again, but
It's fine. That's what it's for.
yeah, I'm still a little like kind of thrown off about Marxism in direct relation to capitalism. Like I get capitalism in itself, but is Marxism basically saying that you don't necessarily agree with capitalism and it's going against human nature?
Right. The idea is that capital creates a system of conflict that does not have to exist.
Okay.
And this is especially true of certain forms of capitalism, right? So capitalism as it develops does things differently depending on how it's implemented, right? Which is why, like, in a lot of European nations, there's kind of a hybrid system of democratic socialism governance where they're highly capitalistic, but they realize that they need to generate and take care of the entirety of the nation in some capacity. And so they have a lot more social safety net. So it's not completely antithetical, but Marx does specifically believe that at the end of history, right? So how it has existed, and that's just what he calls it, we eventually all decide that this is a better way to be, where there's not conflict over, you know, can I afford healthcare or can I afford this resource that is essential for human life, and then it's all kind of shared equally. Okay. So it's a system. The way I like to think about it is that it is a system for interpreting kind of the trajectory of history. Okay. And kind of trying to understand and make sense of human struggle in relation to power structures. Okay. And that's why it's picked up and used as kind of an underpinning for a lot of cultural studies and other disciplines. So like critical race theory has a huge underpinning with Marxist thought. Gender studies has a huge underpinning because it's all about analyzing systems of power and how they assert themselves.
Okay. Thank you for that. That was a better breakdown.
Yeah. I find it's helpful too to like, you know, think about it outside of this is a political ideology, pure and simple, because it is a little more complicated than that. It really is a philosophical question being posed. It's not, you know, I'm a communist and this is how our government needs to be structured, right? You can think that and you can extrapolate that, but it's all about kind of the breaking down of systems historically.
Okay.
Anybody else have questions about stuff? If you have them, I assure you other people do.
Are the discussions, are they like due at a certain point?
I'd like to try and get them done for Wednesdays, but you know, I go back and forth on this. Like, I want to get them in on Wednesdays so that I can look over them and know if there is anything huge I need to address for the coming day, like for now. but I think honestly, I'm going to open it up until and like make them do on Fridays, just so everybody feels like they have a little more breathing room. But if you can respond by Wednesday, it would be highly appreciated.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So I'll change all of that in iCollege, but just aim for Wednesdays if you can. Okay. I know it's all a high stress situation right now for everybody.
I just want to say, I like it. Yeah. I like. I think it's cool. Like what we learned from this. It's some cool points that I didn't know before. And yeah, and about the discussion, can we see other people's posts, or I can, because I only see mine.
So I had them moderated. I'll release them, but I had them moderated just so like everybody could put their own thought into it.
Yeah.
Without
Like
seeing everybody's.
after I finish mine, I try to, I can see what. So think that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is I'll open them up, and some weeks I might ask y'all to have like a full-on discussion, but I haven't exactly figured out how I would like to structure that yet. But when I do, that will be in the prompt, like, respond to somebody plus whatever. Anything else? Anything about class business? I do have a couple of announcements before I cut off the recording, just so people get it reiterated to them. Okay, so next week we have a couple of things to look at. We have 2 shows on Hulu to watch. Okay, and then y'all have one essay that is going to be kind of the primary text, Primetime Ideology. This is a last minute pinch hit because I feel like not reading it would be, not so great on my part, like not getting all exposed to this essay. It's a little more complex, but we'll kind of carry it through over a couple of weeks to keep talking about it, like in our representation week. So don't feel like you have to stress read it right now because I just added it last minute. But it's an essay called Encoding, Decoding by Stuart Hall, who's kind of like the father of modern cultural studies. So I'll put that up online as well. Just have it handy. Look at it, over the next few weeks as you get time. And then, like I said, we'll talk about it a little bit next week and then talk about it again during the representation week, if that sounds okay to everybody. And it's mostly just because I think as far as understanding ideology goes and how media is related to it, he really drives home a lot of key points that are still cited by a lot of media scholars and that might be useful for y'all to have in your toolkits for those final projects. Okay. It's not just me trying to give y'all more work. All right. Thumbs up. Yes. Okay. If that's it, I'm going to stop the recording